There's this small town in Alberta with about 10,000 people, and someone just tried to drop a $10 billion artificial intelligence facility right beside it. Not near it, right beside it. Some residents say it would have transformed the town. Others think it could have been one of the worst decisions this community has ever made. And regulators just shut the entire project down, at least for now. And the strange part is this might be the beginning of something much bigger happening in Alberta. And I've been paying very close attention to this because I actually own property in Olds Alberta, and I am in fact an investor. So let's talk about what this project was and why people are so divided about it, and why Alberta is suddenly trying to attract $100 billion worth of projects like this. Now, the company behind this massive project is called Synapse Real Estate Corp. Now, their plan was to build a 1,400 megawatt data center on 121 hectares of land right on the northeast side of Olds. Now, that number might not mean much on its own, but a facility of this size would require an enormous amount of electricity. For AI data centers of this size, these computers are running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And the cooling systems required to keep these systems running also take up a massive amount of power. In fact, projects like this can use more electricity than small cities. And the investment for Synapse Real Estate Corp was estimated to be at $10 billion. Now, for a town of only 10,000 people, a project of this scale could completely reshape the entire local economy and infrastructure of Olds. Now, the company said it could create 2,000 construction jobs and an additional 1,000 full-time jobs once this AI data center is fully operational, plus significant tax revenue for the town of Olds, which is why some residents actually welcomed the idea, but others were immediately uncomfortable with it. And when you actually look at where the project was proposed, you can start to understand why. Now, one quick thing before we go deeper. If you're interested in Alberta real estate, the bigger economic forces at play that are shaping this province, that is exactly what we talk about on this channel. So consider subscribing if you want honest breakdowns on actually what's happening on the ground here in Alberta. All right, because the next question is what made this whole story super interesting to me. Why Olds? Why would someone want to build one of the largest AI facilities in Canada in a little farming town between Calgary and Red Deer? And there are actually a few reasons places like this in Alberta are starting to show up on the radar for some of these big companies. And the first thing is energy. Artificial intelligence requires massive computing power, and that computing power requires an enormous amount of electricity. And Alberta has something that suddenly looks very valuable in that world: natural gas. And I have a little stat here for you. The province recently announced that recoverable natural gas reserves are estimated at around 130 trillion cubic feet. That's an increase of more than 440% from previous estimates. And AI facilities need electricity every second of the day, which makes reliable energy extremely attractive. The second factor is obvious: land. You simply cannot build something of this scope and size in the middle of a city. And places like Olds have the land available to support a project of this scale. And the third factor is something people don't often think about, and that is temperature. Cooler climates help to reduce the cost of these massive computing systems that are sucking up so much energy, which makes places like Alberta surprisingly competitive. And the provincial government knows it. And the province has actually said it wants to attract $100 billion worth of investment to the province over the next 5 years. Now, that is a massive number, but this is where the story starts to get complicated, because the people living near this proposed project were not just thinking about economic opportunity. They were thinking about something else. So this proposed site for this data center sits near residential neighborhoods. In fact, there are about 800 homes that are within 700 meters of this location. And one resident who lives about 300 meters away raised concerns about noise pollution and environmental impact. Others are concerned about the water usage. As we said before, data centers require these massive cooling systems, which means water consumption becomes a real concern for some of these small communities. Now, here's the other thing. There are also some concerns about transparency. And to be fair, the residents said they wanted a clear picture of what this facility actually does and how it's going to operate long term. And let's just say the conversation started to become a little divisive. Some people saw jobs and investment, other people saw risk. And one resident even pointed out that Olds has already experienced something similar before.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Is the past to repeat itself? Back in the 2010s, a large cannabis producer set up operations during the cannabis boom. And at that time, when that industry contracted, this facility eventually shut down. So some residents are understandably cautious about the actual long-term economic benefits. And then there were some concerns that were a little more unusual. Some residents raised worries about frequencies emitted from this large infrastructure that is not necessarily audible, but could also pose risk to their long-term health. Others even pointed out tornado activity in the region and questioned what would happen if a large data center like this was severely damaged by weather. Now, whether you agree with those concerns or not, it does show why the community is so divisive. And I'm actually curious where people land on this. If you live in Olds or the surrounding area, I want to hear what your opinion is on this. Drop a comment below because this seems like one of those issues where people have very different opinions. So let me know. Now here's where things have taken an interesting turn. The Alberta Utilities Commission rejected the application, but not because they said the project itself was a bad idea. They rejected it because this application had major problems. The regulators said, quote unquote, the documents contain errors, incomplete information, and inconsistencies between different sections. Interesting. They also said the company didn't properly address concerns that had been raised during community consultations earlier this year. And there were also gaps in the environmental and noise impact assessments that needed to be provided. Another issue was the expected lifespan of the project, which was pretty interesting to me. Synapse has suggested this facility could operate for 100 years, but the application did not include a detailed plan of what would happen after the 100 years and this site actually shuts down. Now, most of us are not going to be here in 100 years, but obviously we want to make sure that we are being stewards for the next generation ahead of us. The regulator also said that the company incorrectly assumed that this project was not going to fall under certain federal impact legislation. Well, no shit. Taken together, the commission basically said that there was a significant lack of clarity and the requirements of the application have in essence not been met. So they closed the application. But they've also made it clear that the company has the ability to resubmit an application in the future, which means the story might not be over yet. And this is where the conversation gets bigger than just this one in Olds. Artificial intelligence is driving an explosion in global demand for computing infrastructure. That means more data centers, more electricity demand, and more competition between regions trying to attract these facilities. Now, Alberta suddenly has a few things that make it interesting in this race. We have energy, we have land, and a government that clearly wants investment in this space. So whether this project happens or not, it probably won't be the last time we hear about something like this. And if projects start showing up like this across Alberta, they could dramatically change smaller communities. Economically, infrastructure-wise, and even from a real estate perspective. And if you're an investor looking at these smaller markets like Olds, like Carstairs, this is definitely something that could have major long-term implications on your investment and something you should definitely be aware of. If you have questions about the Olds market or investing in Alberta in general, feel free to reach out to us. My team and I work across the province and we're always happy to have a conversation. And if you enjoy content like this where we actually break down what is happening in Alberta real estate and development, please consider subscribing. We are putting out new videos every single week and we'll see you on the next one.